Now that I have finished my weaving, I am ready to take it off. So what I will be doing is working down at the bottom. I'll move my fringe out of the way, and I'm going to start by cutting my warp strings off. I've made sure that everything is secure, so down as close as I can get. I have a lot of space, but if you're working closer, you want to do it as close as you can to the bottom of your weaving. You're going to snip off those warp strings at the bottom. And then I will have my loops at the top that later on I will put my dowel on. But first what I'm going to do is work on securing this space down here. Now my twining stitch is very strong right there, but I also want to make sure that I knot here as well, just to give some extra security. So I am going to do an overhand knot, and I'm going to try and get it as close up into my twining stitch as I can. So I take 2 warp strings, because then I'm connecting them underneath where I've stitched. I'm looping around and through, and I'm going to pull that up towards the top, or towards the edge, and then I'm going to hold it and pull tight. So a loop of 2 strings and pull tight. Overhand knot, pull tight. Overhand knot, pull tight. Overhand knot, tight. Overhand knot and pull tight. All right, so those are nice and strong there. Now, I could just trim this and the fringe would cover it up. If you want a little extra security, or to make sure that you won't be able to see any of that fringe, I turn it over to the back just like we did when we were finishing our weaving, and then I can thread my needle and I can stitch those ends up into the back. So it just gives a little more security and a little bit cleaner of a look, even though just trimming them off would still get the job done. If you want it to be a little bit neater, you can stitch your ends in. Mine are nice and long, so I can just thread my needle first and pull them in, and then they kind of disappear into there, and then I will end by trimming those ends off so that it looks a little bit neater still. Okay, so you can kind of see the difference. I would trim those so you can hardly see them, or I could trim these a little bit shorter if I wasn't going to stitch them in, and you wouldn't really notice them while it's hanging because this fringe is nice and thick. All right, so my last step after I get my fringe or my bottom of my weaving secured. Now this, while this is a strong stitch, you can see that it can still move on my weaving, and I don't really want that to happen. So part of having that stitch and not doing something called like a hem stitch to lock it in, or I could go back and I could knot these in an overhand to help that be extra secure. But I know that I'm going to put this dowel in here, and that will lock this in there as well. So that's a preference that I usually do, is just lock in with my dowel. There are lots of different sizes of dowels out there. I get them at local hardware stores or like Home Depot or Lowe's. Depending on what thickness you're wanting, you'll want more or less warp string right here. You could just thread them through like that and have it hang, but there's just a little bit more space. I like to do a lark's head knot, which is looping it over and then folding those 2 loops back to make one big loop, and then I slide my dowel in there. This dowel is a 1/2 inch dowel, so I'm going to take that loop, flip it back, and then flip back those 2 loops, open up that hole and slide it in. When I measured this off, I believe I left about 2 inches, so that was just enough for my 1/2 inch dowel to be able to fit right in to these loops that I made. just slide them down as I go. Because I made sure that it was going to be kind of a tight fit when I put this in, that helps me know that I am securing this top edge without adding those knots at the top. If you were going to leave a lot more space there, I would recommend doing some overhand knots or learning how to do a hem stitch to help lock in that top edge. So as I work my way through, making my lark's head knots, overlap, flip back, slide through, then I can kind of even that out. And I am just about done. I could hang it like this and just have like a nail that it sits on there, or I can take some of my warp thread that I had before. I can loop it around on the edges, tie a double knot, on either end. Just give myself a little bit of extra over here to come over and loop it around. Oops. Loop that around, come up through and into your hole, make it nice and tight, and do a double knot for extra security. Trim off my ends. Those will just get kind of tucked behind. And now I have a little hanger that it could sit on a nail or a hook. And I've got my whole weaving ready to go.